Amen. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. I'm jumping in. Matthew chapter 20. Talking about parables still. Big shout out to Pastor Michael for covering for me last week. I thought maybe I could have came to church last week, but that probably would have been a bad idea, so I'm glad I didn't. So parables that we have been talking about, and we're going to continue to talk about. Matthew chapter 20, we're going to jump right in. This is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Starting in verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Okay. So, I titled this one, Fair or Not Fair? Because I think that's a good title. And I think it depends on who we relate to. That's fair. It's a fair title. I think it depends on who we relate to, okay? Because depending on what viewpoint we come from is depending on how we'll relate to things. I read this. It says, a conservative is a liberal who has been mugged. And a liberal is a conservative who has been arrested. You guys get that? Basically, we're at one standpoint until something happens to us that ruffles our feathers in a way where we may then switch to have a different standpoint because it's all based on how we feel. Our notions of justice cannot help but be influenced by our own circumstances and by our opinions about what we think we deserve and about what we think others deserve. See, we like to think that justice has to do with equality. But a lot of time, it's not that at all. Justice is a word we toss around to make things happen that we want to happen, or make things not happen the way we don't want to happen. And then Jesus comes along, and that's what's going on here. And it's like, I think he actually likes to mess with people sometimes. Like when I read this parable, this has got to blow people's minds. Like in this day, I think as we get into it, you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally think that. But he literally messes with people's heads, like to a crazy degree, to get them to think in a different way. Because we are so set in the way we think that sometimes even going into something like this, we can't see the big picture because we only see it from our perspective. So, what's this parable about? Well, I think we can come at it from a lot of different angles, and because there's a lot going on in here. So, we're going to talk about it in several different areas. Number one, if you're taking notes, you can write down the word generosity. This is a parable about generosity. I think we can all agree with that the landowner is very generous to the people who got hired last. Right? So what Jesus says here really has the ability to rub people the wrong way, especially if we look at it in an ethical way. So it starts out the kingdom of heaven. Basically, what that means is, okay, this is the way God sets the standard of things. This is the way it happens in heaven. This is the way God deems it to be. This is what I'm about to explain to you. This is what Jesus is saying. This is God's economy of things. all right? Here's how things are going to go. Hardworking, reliable people are going to feel like they got the shaft. Even though that's not the truth. They didn't get robbed. They didn't get cheated. Didn't get looked down on. They got exactly what they were promised, right? So the kingdom is like, and there's this landowner, which is God in our parable here, and he has people come and work at his vineyard. Whose vineyard is it? His vineyard, the landowner's, who in this parable is God. He owns the vineyard, right? If you guys were here last week, Pastor Michael talked about that. Talked about the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, right? He created everything. He owns everything. We are just stewards of what he gives us. So even in this parable, it's his vineyard. He owns it. Whatever he wants to do with the vineyard, that's up to him, yes? Okay. The fact that he lets us work in the vineyard should be something that we see as super amazing. The fact that he actually hires us to work in the vineyard is something that should totally blow our minds. But when we come to this place where we kind of start to want to determine how God's handling his resources, we're stepping over the line, in all honesty. When we look at this parable and we think, okay, I've been a Christian my whole life and I have been serving God my whole life, and this guy comes and he's been a mass murderer his whole life, but on his deathbed he receives Jesus into his heart. How does he get the exact same inheritance that I get? Because I've been following Christ my whole life, right? Well, because God's generous. So he hires some people in the morning, and then about 9-ish, noonish, 3-ish, 5-ish, right? And he says on the front end, to the earliest people, I'm going to pay you a denarius, which is basically the same as a day's wage. I'm going to pay you a fair day's wage for your work. That's what he says to the first people. The first people in, they're like, this is what you're going to get paid. Okay? Everybody's on the same page with that, right? Then on the rest of them, he says, I'll pay you whatever is right. Okay? And they go to work for that, which I'm just telling you right now, if I was one of the 9 o'clocks or noons or 3 or 5s, I'd probably want a little bit more on the front end, like, what do you mean? What's right to you? What's right to me? What are you talking about here, brother? I need a little bit more info, right? But they don't. They go, okay. At the end of the day, the people that worked an hour get a standard day's wage. And the people who started at 3 o'clock get a standard day's wage. And the people who start at noon get a standard day's wage. And the people who start at 9 get a standard day's wage. And the people who had been working all day got exactly what they were told they were going to get, which was a standard day's wage. Why is there a problem? Does anybody see a problem with this? Everybody's like, no, that's a trick question. Then the full day workers are resentful. Now, I don't know, I like to picture things in my mind, like the 1 hour shift guys, right? They only worked 1 hour, and then the guy's like, okay, here's a day's wage. Those guys were probably like, okay, I'm out of here before he changes his mind, right? I got to go right now. I just made a day's wage, only working an hour. This is awesome, right? The actions of the landowner are all kinds of crazy. It doesn't even make sense. Somebody worked 12 hours and got paid the exact same that somebody worked 1 hour. It's not fair. It's not right. From an economic perspective, it makes no sense. Basically, what you're saying is the people that worked the longest and the hardest got paid, say, $1 an hour, and the people who worked the shortest and the least amount of time got $12 an hour. That's the point. See, Jesus' parables often include this absurd behavior that we can't understand and can't compute in our own minds that makes no sense logically so that he can prove the point that he's trying to prove. It's not supposed to be logical because you're not the one deciding it because it's not your vineyard, right? Good. He said it's not your vineyard? Okay. I don't think he said that, but okay. But do we ever stop and just look at the landowner and go, oh my gosh, this landowner is amazing. Look how generous he is. This is awesome. He's given the people who just started working that were only there for an hour a whole day's wage. We don't often see the generosity because we relate way too much to the people who were there first. Here's a news flash. What if we're not really the first people? Right? What if those of us, okay, so I've been a Christian or following Jesus or however you want to call it for almost 25 years. A lot of you, it's been a whole lot longer. Some of you, it's been shorter. Doesn't matter, time frame wise. I'm saying, compared to let's look at the apostles, because really, I look at the apostles, those are kind of the early morning guys, because they were here when Jesus was here. So they got called to work first. And then we got 2,000 years of people who have been called in. We're really a lot closer to Jesus' return now than they were back then, right? So in actuality, we're probably more like the 3 or 5 o'clock guys. But we're standing here thinking, well, that doesn't even seem fair. Oh, now, if we're looking at it from that perspective, like I'm a 3 o'clock guy or a 5 o'clock guy, oh, this is totally fair, right? I get the exact same inheritance that the disciples got, that the apostles got, the ones who were martyred for their faith, who were killed in ways that you can't even imagine because they wouldn't deny Jesus. I get the same inheritance, and all I got to do is live in America and pretty much, have a seriously pretty easy life in comparison, right? I don't have to make my own food. Actually physically grow it and stuff. I drive around in a car. It's not like I got to find a donkey somewhere to ride. I got shoes and clothes and TV and electricity and running water. Those guys didn't have any of that. I got it easy, and I'm still going to get the same inheritance that they got. Kind of changes perspective a little bit, right? Maybe you're not the first one. Maybe you're more like one of the last ones. Doesn't that make you more excited about the generosity of God now? Okay, so just look at it from a different perspective. All right, number 2, grace. This is a parable about God's graciousness. Graciousness, yes. I read this quote. It says, "So excessive is God's propensity to give and care, it violates our instincts about fairness." It almost, in our minds, it shows God to be rash. Like he's making decisions that don't make sense. These are rash decisions. He didn't think about this. It's God, people. It's his vineyard. He thought about it. He gives the complainers exactly what he promised them. And that's something we need to realize because he always gives what he promises. And he promises us so much, right? Just think, he says in 1 Corinthians 12, "My grace is sufficient for you." Just think about that, just that promise. His grace is sufficient for everything that we need, everything that we do, everything that we are. And he promises us that. And we get to walk out that promise. And whether we've done it for 50 years or 5 minutes, it's the same grace that we all need that is promised to us. Isn't that awesome? When it comes to the grace of God, that's something that each and every one of us needs no matter how long we've been part of the Vineyard team, right? We still need, every day, right? We need his grace, because every day, we're sinners. All right, number 3. You write down people in need. It's a parable about people in need. If we really start looking into these parables and digging into them, you learn more about God than you can ever even imagine, okay? We have to ask this question about who receives extravagance from the landowner. See, sometimes we take this parable and we spiritualize it by saying that, working in the fields is an allegory for serving God or toiling away in the ministries of the church. That's what we all, most people will come to right off the bat. That's what this is. But my guess is that those who are hired at the 5 p.m. one aren't just types of people who sleep in on Sunday mornings and then on their deathbed give their life to Christ. Okay? Who do you think he finds when he's looking for workers at the 5 o'clock hour? What kind of people are the last to get hired? Because we're so self-righteous, we actually, I think, sometimes don't even read the part in there that I'm going to talk about in just a second. We totally go over it because basically we think like, these guys still didn't have a job at 5 o'clock, they're losers, right? But it's way more than that. See, nothing suggests in this parable that those people were lazy or irresponsible or turning their back on work or anything like that. They're standing out there all day. They're standing out there all day. Listen. Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? What's the answer? Because no one has hired us. Now, this is where we get into it. See, why weren't they hired? Well, they were probably the unwanted. Maybe the weakest people. Maybe they were the people who, only had one arm that worked. The disabled. People who were sick. Maybe it was the elderly, right? They go to pick out the workers for the field, and there's some people that maybe are a little up on age over on this end. They probably don't get picked right away, right? Maybe they were criminals. Maybe they had a bad past, they had a reputation. It's like, not picking those guys, right? Maybe they were just unemployed or underemployed. Maybe they just, who knows? Who knows? But what we do know is they weren't wanted because they weren't picked in the morning or at 9 or at noon or at 3. And they were standing there desiring to be picked, desiring work, right? So basically, what God does here through this parable is give us an example of how we should actually treat people. Because we do the same thing. When we're picking workers or when we're picking people to be our friends, or when we're picking people that we might want to have a relationship with, or when we're picking people that we might want to talk to or say hi to or whatever, we pick based on how it's going to benefit us. Now, I'm not saying the landowner did that if the landowner is God. I'm saying that that's how we do things. These people that are often looked down on should actually get and deserve special treatment. Right? That's what the Bible tells us. Take care of the poor and needy. Take care of the widows and orphans. Right? If you see somebody who needs a drink, give them something to drink. Something to eat, give them something to eat. Give them some clothes. People in prison, visit them. People who are sick, right? That's what the Bible tells us. And these are the people that are picked last that we're all looking down on, like, why do they get as much? Why are they being considered equal to us? They're not equal to us. They actually get the exact same treatment from the landowner that those of us who are respectful enough to get hired first get. Because that's what it's about. We're standing out there strong and respectable and ready, and we get picked first. But it doesn't make us better. It's a wonder. It's not a wonder that people get anxious about this parable. Because when you really start looking at it, it's like, oh, that hurts a little bit, right? Because it shows us exactly what we think of those in need. So here's the question. What kinds of people are in need of whatever is right according to God? Everybody. Everybody. We are all in the exact same need. But especially those who are last in line. They actually have a greater need. Maybe as we start thinking about that, maybe that's why God gave them the exact same amount as the people who started working first, because they have a greater need. All right, number 4. Write down the word value. This is a parable about value. In the end, it's not about unfair payments. We'd like to make it about unfair payments. That's what we want to make it about. The payments were not fair. This guy worked 12 hours. He should have got more money than the guy who worked 1 hour. The payment was unfair. That's really what it boils down to in a nutshell when we're looking at this. But at the conclusion of the parable, the full-day workers don't complain and moan that they have been cheated financially. They don't say anything about we deserve more pay because we worked longer. They don't say that. They complain instead to the landowner and say, you have made them, the 1-hour workers, equal to us. Because in their minds, the all-day workers, they are more valuable than the 1-hour workers. And those 1-hour workers should not be made equal to the people who have been working all day. It's not the generosity or the extravagance of the landowner that makes them angry. Rather, the issue is this. By dealing generously with a group of people that no other manager in town considered worth the trouble of hiring, the landowner has made a clear declaration about their value and their worth. The landowner's kindness basically denies the full-day laborers the bonus they think they can claim, which is this sense of privilege and superiority. That's what they're looking at. They're basically coming to this place where we're better than them. It's not about money. It's about they shouldn't get to stand by us. They shouldn't get to receive the same thing as us. They shouldn't get to be called the same as us. Now, we've got to come to terms with this because we might not really think that we deserve more, but sometimes we think our worth is more. That's the problem here. The people didn't think that they deserved more. They just thought they were worth more. That we're more valuable because we were hired earlier in the day. That we're more valuable because, okay, how about this? I'll make it personal. This would be like saying, I'm more valuable to God than you because I'm the pastor. Michael's more valuable to God than you guys because he's the youth pastor. Seth is more valuable to God than us because he's the worship leader. Rebecca's more valuable to God because she takes care of all the women's ministry. You guys cool with that? You think I'm more valuable than you because I'm the pastor? It's not even true. But that's what's going on in this parable. These guys are saying we're more valuable. We deserve more. We are worth more. And God's like, no. No, so clearly no, that I'm going to tell you this parable that shows you how no that really is. Because no, you're not. It's God's preference to show crazy compassion and grace and generosity and love to those who don't have it good. And it's so awesome, you guys. I think I love this parable so much because in all honesty, most of my Christian life, I have felt far more like the 5 o'clock guy than the first guy. Like, we moved to California and we went to a church down there. And it was a church full of really great people. But, you know, it was a big city and it was a big church. And, you know, we didn't really fit in, okay? We're from Coos Bay, Rebecca and I. We've grown up here, lived here the majority of our life, and it was weird. And we tried to fit in, and we tried to learn the customs and tried to do stuff, and, you know, it just never really worked. And so when we started a life group, and which was a group that we started meeting together with, and we started, I got to go on staff as a lay pastor, which means you're a pastor, but you don't get paid. So we had groups of people. They would put people under us that I had to care for because it was a big church. So there was these people under us, and all these people were kind of like us. Like the people who didn't really fit in anywhere else, they kind of got put in the herrings group, which was awesome because that's really where we're at. And then we came back here, and it's like, oh, God, you're totally preparing us for stuff. Because here's the deal. All of us right here, if it comes to the big picture of church, we're the 5 o'clock people, okay? We really are. We don't really fit in. And that's good. That's so good, because I don't want to fit in. I just want to do whatever it is God calls us to do and just be happy and just know how generous he is to us, okay? So it's so awesome. This parable is so awesome because it's like, I'm like, cool. I have the same value as everybody else, and I don't even have to try to prove that to him because God already says so. That's awesome. But sometimes we lose sight of that, and sometimes we think we're a little more. Don't do that. Because when we think we're more valuable, we think it because of the things we've done. But nothing that we have done is really ours anyways. It's, like Michael said, talents, bags of gold that God gave us. It's just what we do with them because he gave them to us. Whether it be our money, whether it be our time, whether it be our talents, whether it be anything, we take those and we do what it is that we're called to do with them. And it's all God. And so at the end of the day, we don't have to be more valuable because in God's eyes, we're all the same value, whether you started at 6 o'clock in the morning, you started at 5 o'clock at night. It's pretty awesome, really, because our value is based on what he says, and he says we're extremely valuable, so valuable that he paid for us with the blood of his son. That's how valuable we are. And whether we receive that and walk in it our entire life on this earth, or we get that in our deathbed after living any way we want, if that's, if you want to roll those dice, the value is still set. And I think if we look at this parable in light of our sins and our inadequacies and our failures, and we realize we're far more like the 5 o'clock people than the first people in the morning, it makes this parable a lot better. But it also gives us the grace for those people who are on the front end, to be able to say, it's cool, whatever. Our value stays the same. Then he finishes it up, and he says, the last will be first, and the first will be last, right? You guys heard that before? Okay. This is not just for multiple choice dinners or lunches, right? Because somebody's always like, no, I'll go last. Let me go last, because the last shall be first. It actually doesn't work that way in multiple choice lunches. If you're last, you're actually going to be last. The first people will probably have came back and gotten in line for seconds, and you still will be hoping there's a warm hot dog. Basically, what God's saying is like, look, your economy doesn't matter. His economy is what matters. If he says last is going to be first, guess what? Last is going to be first. First is going to be last, guess what? First is going to be last. We're just good with that. Here's the deal. First or last, I don't care. Doesn't matter. I'm just, wanting in. I'll be last. I'll be first. I don't care. Anywhere in between. Whatever's good. You decide, all right? But let's not be so quick to try to find fault in God's generosity. He gets to do whatever he wants to do because it's all his. Yes? All right, let's pray. God, you're good to us. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your compassion and your grace. Thank you for this parable that teaches us to make sure that we just keep our eyes fixed on you because you determine our value. You are generous. You are worthy of all our praise, and it's not up to us to look around and see who's making what at what time and how much they got and when they started and all that. Our job is just to do what it is you call us to do and walk in that wholeheartedly. And God, for that we say thank you, that we get to do anything in the vineyard, that you hire us at all, that we've been sitting there all day and you're finally like, hey, come to work for me. And we're like, yes, finally. Either way, God, we're just thankful that we get to do what it is you've called us to do. You're amazing. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.